G'day and welcome to my first video for 2025. I'm going to start the year by going a bit deeper into this red dragon here. A lot of you enjoyed my 10 years of red video. Thanks a lot for the support on that one. That was definitely one of the early videos that kind of egged me on to keep going. And yeah, I think there's still a bit to talk about with these cameras. So right here, we've got my red dragon, and I'm just going to go into a bit of the history of this camera, my history with this camera, and from a practical perspective, whether or not something like this has its place in 2025. So for any of you that hadn't seen my 10 years of red video, I'm just going to rehash a little bit. So I've been using red cameras since probably around 2014, the first few times those being rentals, and then I picked up my own one in 2017, coming off the back of using a Sony FS7, which was written off in an accident, and with the money from the warranty on that, I ended up realizing that I could be able to put it towards a secondhand red Epic X for about the same amount of money, which to me at the time was a pretty kind of exciting proposition. In that period prior to that, reds had been way out of my price range, and with the new models that had been coming out, the older ones had gone down quite a lot in price, and I was able to get an Epic X for a comparable price to an FS7. And yeah, that camera served me really well for a few years. I ended up upgrading that camera to a Dragon X, which is this one here, and I've had that ever since. I still love this camera. I still love the image out of this camera. And in research for this video, I've kind of gone back through and looked at what projects I've shot in the last few years, how many times this has actually gone out on jobs and things like that. And definitely still my favorite footage year in, year out has been shot with this camera. And what's been really good about it for me is I've been trying to do these personal short documentary projects, try and do one or so a year. I've touched on those a little bit recently. I was lucky enough to take out an award for both of those at this year's Australian Cinematography Society New South Wales Awards here in Sydney. I got 2 golds, one for my Gold Foster King documentary, Blue and Gold, and the other one for one called Awake. Both of those are on my channel if you want to check them out. And both of those have either been entirely or partially shot with this camera here. And lots of my favorite shots in those have been shot with this camera.
This is a good spot here. Back a few years ago, my mate found ounces and ounces of gold along a quartz stringer along here. And what it was like every time we'd move a lot of dirt, we'd move that much dirt and it'd just be littered with gold nuggets all the way along. So we worked it from one side of the river to the other, and then it was done. And he probably pulled about $5,000 worth of gold out of it, and it was, yeah.
So just to go over the setup that I've got here, this is set up in a pretty common way that I would use and have used out on some of these shoots. So NATO rail attachment on the side here for the monitor so that I can kind of put that in any position. You know, this enables me to angle it basically anywhere I want. I can get it right up here. I can get it facing upwards. If it's on a tripod, I can get it angled down and the monitor facing down. There's a lot of maneuverability here. So this is just a small rig monitor arm. I've put a, what they call a rib attachment on the side here, which is basically just a long NATO arm. I have a little NATO rail on the top here, which I have a top handle for. On the side here, you'll see the red handle, which has all kinds of controls on it. Record, you can preset some buttons there. You can put one on exposure toggle, things like that. A lot of really good functionality in that. And also another pretty cool feature of these handles is that you can have one of these little red volt batteries inside, which enables you to hot swap V-Lock batteries. Now these here, they're pretty tiny. Where are we? 37 watt hours. So look, half an hour max, I'd say, on that battery there. So they're not a battery that you're gonna use for shoots, but I find it super handy just to be able to leave that in the side handle and kind of just know that if my V-Lock runs out, the camera's not gonna just suddenly power off. I'm gonna see on the display that it is now getting its power from the side handle. So the little voltage indicator on the screen will actually flash SH, meaning side handle. And as soon as that comes on, I know to change the battery pretty quick. In my head, when I see that side handle icon flashing, I probably think, okay, I got 15, 20 minutes max here. Let's change this battery over. But yeah, super handy feature. Don't think I've seen that on too many other cameras. Even Red's newer cameras don't have that. They started making the side handles smaller, and basically it's just a record button, no other real functionality. So I actually really liked this side handle, and that side handle is designed to work in my underwater housing that I have for this camera. So it's a good way for me to have control over the water housing in the water and also getting that battery feature. Got a battery on the back here and a contact Zeiss 50mm on the front, bit of a personal favorite. And the combination of the contact Zeiss lenses and this camera, yeah, I've got a lot of results with this setup I've been super happy with. When jumping from the Epic X to the Dragon here, basically I got 6K resolution instead of 5K, and a bit of a cleaner sensor with a little bit more dynamic range and some slightly nicer colors, I would say. I've also got the low light OLPF in here, and look, maybe I did something wrong, but when I got this camera, it came with 2 OLPFs, the skin tone highlights one and the low light. I thought I was gonna love the skin tone one because they say that it gives you extra detail in the highlights, nicer skin tones. I did a fair bit of testing with that OLPF and just didn't get good results. I found I got some strange colors. I found it was way more prone to IR pollution when you had non-IR NDs on it out in bright environments. Yeah, I don't know. I just struggled with that, and I think it also decreased the low light capabilities slightly. I'm pretty sure I read something recently that you can lose up to a stop and a half in the shadows using that one. When I put the low light OLPF in there, however, I was really happy with the results in all scenarios. I think it really helped, of course, with the low light performance, but I actually like it all round. I didn't notice any loss of highlight details. Actually, from being quite used to this sensor now and doing the old trick of pushing the ISO up in bright environments, I'm actually super happy with the highlight performance. And when I got the Komodo, I was a little bit disappointed at first because I think I was getting much better results out of this. And so, you know, on a lot of my projects, I'm running ISO 12,000 outdoors, and I think that's just giving better highlight performance, a nicer highlight roll off, and yeah, just a bit more of a filmic look. With that said, this isn't a sensor that can handle low light very well. I definitely would probably rarely push this sensor over 1280 or 1600. At those, I'm pretty happy with it, and especially if you're shooting in 6K, I find in the end result, if you are getting any noise, it's generally pretty nice, but be under no illusion, it's not a good low light camera at all. So yeah, I just thought it'd be interesting to touch a little bit on the history of this camera and what's kind of changed out there in the world and in the camera kind of landscape. So when this one came out, I think it was announced in 2012 and came out in 2013. And I've found here that the original pricing for the Brain was 24 grand. That's US dollars, 24. Fast forward to 2025, you can track one of these down on Red User, Facebook Marketplace, a few places like that for, I would say, under 5,000 US. So pretty significant drop. The interesting thing is though, the specs still really stand out. Still a very competitive sensor, and I guess just shows how ahead of its time it was. And just on that note of how ahead of its time it was, just to clarify what this camera has been used on over the years, a lot of my favorite TV shows and movies and things like that were shot on this camera. And I think it really benefited from offering those higher resolutions when its competitors didn't. So e.g. the OG Alexa, when Netflix started doing original shows like House of Cards and things like that, they didn't want to use Alexas on those productions because they didn't shoot true 4K. This did. And so just to run off a few titles, House of Cards, Narcos, Mr. Robot, 10 Cloverfield Lane, Night at the Museum, Gone Girl, all shot with this camera. Pretty solid list of productions, and definitely watch any of those and you'll see they all look great. And I mean, I would argue that in 2025, people wouldn't be shooting productions like that on a Red Komodo. Komodo would be used on indie films and a few things like that, and also as like one of the extra angle kind of cameras or crash cam, things like that. Don't get me wrong, a great camera, but I definitely don't think people would view it in the same league as they did this camera at the time. And so what were the competitors to this camera when it came out? You had the original Alexa, which was around 100 grand US. The Canon C500, the first one, came out around that period of time, and it was around 30 grand. Sony brought out the F5 and the F55. I found some prices here, which I'll put up on the screen, but basically for the camera alone, you're looking at about 20 for the F5 and 35 for the F55. Now, those two cameras would go on to dominate the TV industry in coming years. I would say they're not direct competitors. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think those cameras were ever used extensively for movies, music videos, things like that. I think they were much more TV documentary, TV shows, replacement for ENG style cameras, things like that. I wouldn't say that they were cameras known for their look. I would say they were more workhorses, which had a better look than previous similar cameras have had. That's all. The Sony FS700. For me, that was a camera I saw around a lot and I considered getting at different points. I'm sure especially anyone that comes from some kind of sport shooting background, skateboarding or surfing or anything like that, would be very familiar with the FS700 because it was one of the first cameras to offer some pretty crazy slow-mo options at an affordable price. It could do 240 frame bursts from memory, so you could roll at 240 frames, then stop the clip, and then it would buffer and record that clip. So it wasn't like a continuous keep rolling kind of thing. It did then have to buffer that, but still being able to get 240 frames at 1080 was pretty big at the time. But I would say that and this were at pretty different ends of the market. I would say the FS700 was for people like me who couldn't afford this at the time. 25K US, adjust for inflation, pretty expensive camera. I was earlier in my career, and I also definitely wasn't spending or had that amount of money to spend on a camera. The other two cameras I'll just mention at this point, which were kind of competitors at the time. Canon came out with their first 4K capable SLR. That was the 1DC, which went for about 12 grand. I never actually used one of those. High-end SLR, I guess, but yeah, there were cheaper competitors around, and this is at the time where I'd say 4K was only just becoming a thing, so it wasn't the be-all and end-all, and yeah, it wasn't like it was now, where it was more like a necessity than a nice to have. The other one that came out was the first ever Blackmagic cinema camera. I did use that on some shoots actually. I was never super interested in buying one, but yeah, pretty progressive camera. I'd say it didn't get anywhere near the market share of cameras like the Pocket 4K and 6K Ursa, things like that have. There was a lot of problems with that camera, but I guess it was a bit of a sign of what was to come with Blackmagic and how much of a progressive and competitive company they would be, I guess you'd say. The reason I went through that is just to kind of show what this was competing in at the time and how much things have changed. I guess this was way cheaper than an Alexa, but still had really high-end capabilities. To compare it to the cameras that it was similarly priced to, I would say far superior. Sure, it wouldn't have had the functionality of cameras like the original C500 and the Sony F5, F55s, etc., but much nicer image, a much more desirable camera for feature films, music videos, high-end documentaries, very high-end option. And I would say at that point in time, the Red brand probably would have packed a lot more punch than it does now. People would have been pretty blown away if you owned a Red at the time, more so than they are now, with cheaper options like the Komodo around, and the ability to pick up second-hand cameras like this much more affordably.
I had a particularly stressful period at work that set off a chain reaction that would leave me struggling to survive. It started with a few nights of no sleep and then turned into full-blown insomnia for over 30 days. I find it so hard to explain what insomnia is like to people who have never experienced it, a crippling anxiety over the thought of not sleeping again and how this would impact my life and those around me.
So now I thought it would be interesting just to give a bit of a breakdown of what it's like being an owner-operator of one of these cameras, and looking at how much it actually gets used on a regular basis for me. And look, just to clarify, this is not really my A camera these days. I would say the Red Komodo has been my main camera for paying shoots in recent years. Reasons being, I guess, it's a more in-demand camera because it's much newer, and it also offers things that this didn't, e.g. ProRes is actually one of the big ones. So this is just the DSMC1 version, not the newer DSMC2. Same sensor as a lot of those cameras, but it was only with DSMC2 that Red brought out the ability to be able to use the whole sensor and record in ProRes a resolution of choice, e.g. 4K or 2K. Bit of an underrated thing about a lot of these cameras. So, not this one in particular, but the DSMC2 line, being able to use that whole sensor and record in ProRes, pretty handy feature, and a lot of people request that. They kind of get that Red color science and a really nice image, but just in easier to work with files than R3D. Kind of debatable, because R3D actually is quite easy to work with, but yeah, a lot of people prefer those lower resolution ProRes options than the full resolution RAW. So I looked back over the last few years just to see how many times I did use this camera, and in 2024, and this is just on projects, not necessarily shooting days, so some of these may have been multiple, but we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I used this on 8 projects in 2024, and my Komodo I used on over 35. In 2023, I only used this on 5 projects. Same thing, my Komodo did over 35. 2022, what do we got? Did 5 projects on it in 2022 as well. Even in 3 years, I didn't use this camera as much as I used the Komodo in 1 year. So it's definitely collecting dust a bit. And it's a constant dilemma for me now. It's kind of like, do I sell this and maybe upgrade my Komodo to the Komodo X, or see if I can get a good price on a Raptor or something like that? Or do I just hang on to it? The answer has been, up until this point, to just hang on to it. And when I want to do one of those personal short films, this has been my go-to. Because I'm funding those projects myself, to go and rent an Arri or something like that, Venice, any of the cameras that would help me elevate the image, they're pretty expensive to rent. And so this is my best option, I guess, to kind of compete with that at the moment. Shoot on this, try to get the grade as good as possible, and I can get end results that I'm pretty happy with, and I would say at least compete with those more expensive cameras. I'm not going to say it's better or worse than those. Sure, you can probably get better images out of a Venice or an Arri or a Raptor, things like that. Sure. But from a cost perspective, this has allowed me to get results that are at least in the ballpark of those cameras, which is why I've held on to it. But, looking back at those kind of numbers, it will be something I toss up this year. So with all that in mind, let's just talk a bit about how things have changed. So what's changed since 2012? I would say a few things. There's a lot more competition to cameras like this. Blackmagics have come a long way, and you can get super nice images out of them. If you use nice glass, expose well, and follow all the kind of regular cinematography principles that would go into forming the ingredients that will get you a good end result, you can definitely get those results with cameras like Blackmagic, which are quite cheap. Sony's come a long way. Sony had a bad name for color science around the FS7 era, A7S Mark I and II. I think with the release of the FX series of Sony's, and now, they got the Burano, they got the Venice, their color science has gotten way better. And when things are shot well and graded well, there's some really nice work coming out on Sony's. People are getting great results with those cameras, and they're just so usable with the autofocus and things like that. This here, right now, has been shot on an A7S III because the autofocus is so good. And it's just a really handy camera for me to be able to shoot this on by myself and know that it's going to stay in focus. I've done stuff on the Komodo shooting myself talk, and it just doesn't end up coming out that good because I have to shoot less shallow. I don't know, this just being able to kind of shoot wide open and have the face tracking on just works better. And I don't think when I grade these up that I would notice a massive difference between this and the Komodo. So yeah, I think cameras have come a long way, and that's also changed the perception of brand names in the industry. I think in a good way, in a lot of cases. I know when I first moved to Sydney, owning a Red did actually help me get quite a bit of work, which was good for me, especially seeing I didn't pay a silly amount of money for my initial Red because I got that Epic X secondhand. But I definitely think the Red name is maybe not as impressive as it used to be. Look, I'm a realist and I'm not a Red fanboy. I'm not a fanboy of any brand, and I'm not trying to sell anyone anything. So yeah, I think brand has gotten less important, and it's come back to more how you use it, how you shoot, how you light, things like that, which I think is a good thing. With that said, however, I still do think these are a pretty attractive camera. Like I said, even though I look back at my work in recent years and see that this has gone out on way less jobs than something like my Komodo, my favorite work has still been shot with this camera. So for a lot of people who care more about the end result, having resolution options, frame rate options, things like that, I think these are a great buy. Like I think, if I was to purchase something now, I'd be getting a DSMC2, probably not a Dragon. Even though there is a lot to be said about the Dragon sensor, there's 3 DSMC2 cameras that I really like that I would strongly recommend. The Gemini, the Helium, and the Monstro. All of those cameras are capable of producing really nice images, and I think if you shopped around on the secondhand market, you'd pick up one of them for a pretty good price. Any of those cameras is going to be able to get you amazing end results. And the reason I would go for one of them instead of this is because of the ability to record in ProRes as well. However, with that said, these, pretty good. You'll get it for cheaper, still amazing specs, things like that. Like my one here, it has the side module updated to the mini mags instead of the full size mags that the Epic X and the original DSMC1 cameras took. So I made sure this camera included that so that I could at least use the newer generation of cards, because I knew that the old full-size ones were only going to get harder and harder to get your hands on. I think there is still a lot of reasons why you might want to buy a Red in 2025. Basically, it comes down to, you got 3 options. A used DSMC 1 or 2, a Komodo, either the OG or the X, both great cameras. I think if you're looking for one now, you'd be trying to get a good deal on the X. I don't see too many of them popping up on the secondhand market lately, but they did drop the RRP on them, and I think the price is pretty good and the specs it offers are pretty good. It comes very close resolution and frame rate options to offering what this did, which is pretty cool, but just in a much more modern body. The power consumption, the media it takes, the color science, the sensor. There are a lot of things that do go in the favor of that camera. The other one is the Raptors. I think secondhand Raptors are dropping in price pretty quickly, and they're a very solid full-featured camera. Full frame, 8K, 6K, S35, all your ProRes options, good media options, built-in V-mount. Does tick a lot of boxes. So definitely, I will be keeping my eye out on the used market for Raptors this year. For someone like me who goes out and shoots a lot of my own documentaries and works on projects where I get to choose the camera, it does make a lot of sense, because I think it's getting you close to the look of way more expensive cameras like the Alexas and the Venices, but much more cost effective. So yeah, look, just to wrap things up, Red is as strange a company as they've ever been. I don't think you should hate them, and I don't think you should love them. What I mean by that is they've been super progressive with pushing technology and come out with a bunch of great cameras. On the downside, maybe you could say they've used a bit of a Apple marketing strategy and haven't really looked after their owners from a helping maintain the value of their investment kind of perspective. But that's just what you got to take in mind when you buy one of these cameras. And that's why I'd kind of generally advise people with Reds to try and pick one up secondhand, maybe with the exception of the Komodo. It's kind of the only way to protect yourself with these. If you haven't spent too much on it, then it doesn't owe you as much. And I think you can get pretty solid lifespan out of these cameras. I mean, this one's still going strong and it's showing no signs of deteriorating, more or less. Still super happy with the results of it. I mean, the good thing about them being such high resolution cameras is that they are gonna stand the test of time a bit. I mean, their current offerings, being able to shoot in 6K or 8K, that's going to be pretty future-proof for the next couple of years. You know, when you're working in the industry, it is slower than what camera companies would make it out to be. And I mean, that's the other thing with all this stuff, and hopefully a bit of a message I can get across on this channel. You know, these are all companies just trying to sell you things. Try not to be too sucked in by that, and try to just focus on the results that the tool is capable of getting you, because that's all it is. It's a tool. And as soon as you start looking at it as this thing that's going to get you all this work and make you all this money and impress people, and you know, I think that's what they want you to think. That's just the marketing, the same thing that makes you buy the new iPhones. So yeah. Anyway, I hope that's added a little bit to the whole red discussion, maybe than what I did in my other video. If you have any questions or your own thoughts, drop them in the comments, and yeah, look forward to dropping more videos in 2025. Cheers.